Can you see me over the podium?
And here's another mic.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Naimi. I'm the garbage man. I do make yes happen. I'm going to give a little talk about what we do in Detroit. Detroit is the most fascinating city in America. Yeah, where's that? Cool. Wherever you go, you tell people you're from Detroit, and they know all about it. It could be Motown, it could be cars, it could be techno, it could be crime. What pops into their head when they hear the word Detroit? Most commonly, people ask, is it as bad as they hear? The answer is yeah, it is. Detroit is that bad. It's a dangerous place, but it is our home, and we love it. Detroit is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. We put the world on wheels, taught it how to dance. We're the home to the arsenal of democracy that won World War II and made America a superpower. Detroit created most of what makes America American. The muscle car, Motown, techno, blue collars, malls, highways, Kmart. There we go. Detroit gave the world the tools to sprawl, to empty their urban cores, fill the suburbs, to build driveways and privacy fences, detach from their neighbors. Detroit built America, but the America that Detroit built is an unsustainable, disposable America. And what remains is an empty core of rubble and detritus. It is short-sighted and foolish to think Detroit is an anomaly. People often ask, so how do we build community? How do we bring a city back to life? I didn't move to Detroit to fix it. I was attracted to the dysfunction, the lawlessness, the freedom. There are many like me, people that didn't move in for what it once was or what it could be. We moved there for what it is today. And then a funny thing happened. Wow.
That worked out.
Did that work out? Yeah. I don't know if I went too shit. We started cleaning things up, making our own little spots nicer, lending a hand, helping each other out. In a city devoid of functioning systems, we started to create our own. And this time, we could make them sustainable. I'm the recycling guy. I talk trash. I listen to stories of how people are sorting their garbage, and I'm actually interested. I give pointers, I tell funny stories. I'm good at it, I enjoy it, and I've been doing it every Saturday in the old Lincoln Car Factory on Holden Street in Detroit. Recycling itself isn't sustainable. Nothing can be considered sustainable if the system that it operates in is not sustainable. And the way we are headed as a people and a planet is simply not sustainable. Creating systemic change is the way I approach sustainability. Changing behaviors and habits to build the foundation of a more sustainable society begins with individual actions. In 2006, the city of Detroit was the largest city in the United States without a recycling program. So I began with a simple goal of providing public recycling in my neighborhood, with giving people the opportunity to recycle if they wanted to, and if you had that desire, we were there. I say desire because no money ever changes hands at our facility. We don't pay for the material people bring us, and we ask that you separate it. And we learned two things early on. The recyclers that were coming to us were eager to learn more and do more, and would ask questions and value our answers. And almost everyone using our program had been taught how to recycle by a parent or a friend, often really early in their lives. So we began to engage the recyclers that had found us with art and music, to get them to feel at home, to engage with us, to make them inquisitive, and to build both trust and community. This thing is wonky. There we go. But we had to build the desire to recycle, the desire for kids to be green, by actively engaging the youth in Detroit by creating an education nonprofit called Green Living Science that we funded by the material that was brought to us. So we funded the organization out of garbage. The act of recycling is a simple habit that is very easy to get into when you're a child. Everyone is taught about a garbage can. We just need to explain that there are two of them and what goes into what. But what that habit brings alive is the curiosity of why things go in the recycling bin, and what are they made of, and what happens to garbage. They are taught that there's no away, and there's what a green job is, and there's this place on Holden Street that you can take all this stuff. And when they show up, they have questions, and we're there to answer them. So now we're standing in an old auto factory with an ever-increasing flow of recyclers who are motivated to do the right thing simply because it was the right thing to do. And that is when we began to not only answer the questions, but steer the conversations. Artists that began to tap into the resources that people were bringing us, and and started leaving murals as a reward for people who had done the right thing. To date, Recycle here has recycled over 16 million pounds of material and been visited by over 400,000 people. So we decided to use that same approach that we used to build the recycling program to really change our neighborhood. I'm a firm believer that you worry about what you can't control. You do your best to make your street and block a better place, and if enough people do that, then it spreads to the city and the state, the world. We began cleaning up a side lot on Lincoln Street on the other side of our building. People were illegally dumping. We were trying to keep it clean, so we used volunteers and cleaned it up. And once we got done, instead of putting up a restrictive fence, we put up art, invited people in to make the space their own. And this is the story of how the Lincoln Street Art Park began, but what has grown out of this little cleanup project has taken on a life of its own. Rebuilding community is one of the big challenges facing Detroit. Often when communities rebound, they gentrify, removing longtime residents for shiny new things, cracking down on the street artists, the wild and crazy parties, the BMX and skateboard kids. A big part of that is this rebirth is often tied to investment. And investment needs a return, and what is courted are people with money. What made Lincoln Street so different was that no money ever changes hands on Lincoln Street. You hang out because you can. We don't exclude people. We welcome all. So we started throwing the wild and crazy parties. We gave our walls to the graffiti kids. We supported the artists with space in our building. For a true community actually embraces all. People gather for the right reason, and in this space are encouraged to participate, to add to the project, to make their mark, to collaborate, to inspire. If you build it, they will come. If they build it, they will stay. Now here comes the wild. It's a good one. So what was started as a little project to make sure your soup cans could be recycled started doing some really big things. The Detroit Symphony Orchestra played inside of our recycling center. Shakespeare was performed next to the dumpsters. Green Living Science worked with Doyle and other artists to create the Activitree, which is an interactive sculpture classroom out of a shipping container that will allow for more hands-on environmental education lessons for Detroit students. When the Detroit Institute of Arts was threatened with liquidation, it was a group from Holden and Lincoln that put the issue on the front page of the New York Times with a fire message from the mouth of a dragon. The message was still the same that we began this entire project with, that to truly change the future, we have to invest in education in our youth to provide them with the resources, knowledge, and desire to make the world a better place. That is by having art to stimulate the imagination, places where creativity is encouraged and participation is welcomed. Because to build a better world, we need kids who can think creatively about problems, because the solutions are not right in front of us. Detroit would be fixed if it was. I get a lot of accolades for doing what I do in Detroit, but if you really look at my projects, all I ever did was give people the opportunity to participate. I built a loose framework and let the energy created by the people connecting power the entire program. I'm incredibly lucky to work every day with Rachael and Doyle, we have done some amazing things together. We've had wild adventures while doing really good things, and now they're going to tell you some of those stories. I don't know how this works. There you go. It's that. I was hitting the wrong button. Yeah, I was hitting that button thing.
Okay, we had our quick training session. I'm ready to go now. All right, thank you, Matt. I think you'll hear some themes throughout today, which is a wonderful thing. If you hear it multiple times, they'll stick with you. Must mean it's true then, right? All right, so I want you to think about a place or a thing that makes you smile, really makes you smile. Now figure out how to make that a career. That was the best advice that was ever given to me at a time when I was pretty much ready to leave a job and no clue what the next step would be for me. My answer surprised me though. What I thought about was the recycling center in Detroit that I'd worked at about 3 years prior. And when I worked at the recycling center, I would help people sort their trash. I would take zip codes so we could keep track of where people came from. But most importantly, I would stand there, and this would be my view. I would stand there and I would see people running into their neighbors, I would see them help each other, and I would see people give each other hugs. I got to see people form a community around a necessary thing of trash disposal. And at that time when I was given that advice, I hadn't lived or worked in Detroit for over 3 years. And I definitely did not know how to make sorting trash a career. But literally the very next day, when I was flying home from somewhere, I ran into Matt in the airport. I hadn't really thought or seen him in 3 years. So I didn't really believe in fate at the time, but I quit my job and started my transition back to Detroit the next week. Growing up in the suburbs of Detroit, Detroit was a place that my friends and family would go to, where we would go to events, we would go to museums, and hear music and see a lot of parades. Now living in Detroit, it's a place where my friends and I throw events, such as the Arrival that we did 2 years ago, where we built a giant spaceship out of styrofoam and trash and had it flying through the art park. And I get to play music with my band, Botanical Fortress. That's a crazy jam, experimental noise band. And now we are the parade. Whether it's driving down the streets of Midtown Detroit in a cockroach car that Doyle built, or whether it's driving in a dumpster for the our Corktown parade during St. Patrick's Day. I get to be part of a community that has always been there, and I get to be part of a community that we've created. But the most important work that I do is part of the community that's always been there, and that is uniquely Detroit. As the director of Green Living Science, we really value working through infrastructures and systems that have always been there, which means that I do a lot of work with our public school system, and I do a lot of work with our city government. And that can be extremely challenging at times, and things don't always move as fast as they maybe could if I didn't have to work through those systems. But that is how you take a city that previously had no recycling to a city that now has curbside recycling in less than 10 years. And a city that has kids demanding that they keep their own neighborhood clean. Now, it might sound silly talking about our accomplishments with recycling, considering we're standing here in San Francisco, but our story is not about our accomplishments to get more metal cans to make more car parts with. Our story is about how a city that's constantly in the news for bankruptcy and for failing schools can not only survive, but can thrive. Matt laid the groundwork for a lot of the work that we do with education and getting into the community, and I was able to establish Green Living Science as a viable nonprofit organization. And then came Doyle with his fire-breathing trash dragon. And this was not only the vehicle where I first learned how to drive stick shift, but it's also the vehicle that we use to teach kids about the very important disciplines that every educator knows: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. In our school systems today, we are more and more, you've already heard this, we are devaluing science, art, and critical thinking. So we are challenged to find creative solutions to be able to give students the confidence and the technical skills to be able to come up with solutions for the colossal problems that we are facing today and in our future. To do this, we're taking kids out of the classroom and we're bringing them into the recycling center and the Lincoln Street Art Park. We're teaching kids about conserving resources and dreaming big. We're teaching kids that art and street art is a healthy form of self-expression. And as one high school student told me after a stencil and wheat paste workshop, she does care about her community, she does have something to say, and now she knows how to express it.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I really want to thank Deborah for what you said. I think that since high school, you know, those are the things that I've been studying, especially Joseph Beuys, and how you can really engage art to create change. So I'm going to flash back a little bit to how I first got to Burning Man. I was just out of high school, and some friends of mine in the Black Label Bike Club had been doing this thing called pedal camp. And at the time, I was like 16 or 17, so I couldn't really make it out yet. But they would tell me about, you know, hanging out in the middle of the desert. People would just walk up with bicycles and like a case of beer and say, hey, can you make this cooler? And all they did was just hang out and drink beer and make these really freaky mutant tall bikes and all kinds of stuff. So after I turned about 20, I got invited to be a part of DPW, and I'd never been to Burning Man. So about 2 months before the event, I showed up and I met Flynn, who gave me a good up and down look over, and Will, who I was pretty terrified of, but could tell he was a man who commanded some respect and deserved it. And I showed up the first day and went to the hot springs. And when I showed up on the ranch, the first thing they said was, okay, you can't work today. This is your first day and you're gonna have to acclimate. And getting thrown into this giant pool of freaks, it was more about acclimating to that than it was about like taking a break and acclimating to the altitude, the dust, the heat, etc. So the next morning, after I kind of set up my camp, I went and talked to Flynn at the morning meeting, and he said, you know, well, what can you do? Why are you here? I was like, well, I went to art school and I make parade floats. And he was like, perfect. My girlfriend's on the ranch next door, down the block, and she's a little behind schedule, so why don't you just go help her build her project? Didn't really tell me what it was. And I showed up and met Lisa and about 10 other beautiful welding ladies and DA. And it was pretty much us on a ranch for about 2 months as we made this monstrosity come true, and it is the biggest thing I'd ever helped create. And part of the reason I came to Burning Man is somebody told me that this was the biggest canvas in the world, and it was the most participatory art project and collaboration that you could be involved in. And I was like, okay, I gotta go. So this first like introduction to Burning Man wasn't really about going to Burning Man for me. It was meeting the DPW, and I've always. Does anyone else have like a little weird feeling when people call you a burner? Right? Like I kind of want to identify with it, but there's something that I'm always just kind of, it's a little bit weird. I was like, why is that, dude? Like, why do you have a problem with that? And I couldn't figure it out. The only explanation I had is that it was the DPW that I first met, and that's where I really felt like I could identify with them. I felt like I fit in. And I felt like I could help create what DPW meant, you know? And at the time, it was pretty much Lord of the Flies with like half Mad Max and then like half interesting art conversation and performance art. And we would be out there for months, and it became part of my yearly regimen. You know, I was out there in the dirt, hanging out with all these people, and it wasn't necessarily Burning Man that I looked forward to every year. It was hanging out with these kids and these other freaks that were traveling around the world and trying to experience and sort of already share that freedom in the way that I think the leadership conference is looking for. So we didn't really have anything, us young bike club kids. And one time during cleanup, back when it was cleanup, before it became restoration, somebody ditched this Gremlin, 73 Gremlin on the playa. If it was you, come find me someday. But instead of just burning it like the couches or anything else that we were doing at the time, I promised DA I wouldn't talk about that. I'm sorry. Instead of like getting rid of it, we worked on it. We worked on it for a couple nights. We got it running, and we took this piece of crap, our car, and we cut everything off of it, and we tried to give it some intent of getting us around. So from there, I went on to building my own art car with a similar experience where somebody had ditched an old dune buggy on the ranch, and I got it running, put a different engine in it, and during my off time while I was running the metal shop for DPW, I would stay up at night and just be on the ranch and staring at this goat skull that I got off Flash's tree. He gave me permission. He was like, you can pick something off, it's fine. So I would sit and I'd try to figure out how I can make this skull onto the dune buggy and also help show the other people in the metal shop that wanted to help, like how to do a little bit more specific things than just like stick welding a T-steak pounder or some of the rudimentary things that we do in the metal shop at the time. From there, I had moved on a little bit more and started meeting people outside of the Burning Man community. So I got the confidence to not just go back to Minneapolis and work, you know, a day job and do art on the side, but after being at Burning Man, I was like, this is what I have to do full time. And I met some other people and we started doing bigger projects like, I'm gonna go back to this one. Like the Swimming Cities of Serenissima, where there's about 50 artists that came together, led by this amazing woman, Swoon. And we found a bunch of junk on the piles of the streets of New York on the first one. That was this boat. So this is all made out of stuff that we found on the streets of New York, in dumpsters, on the ground. And we found a bunch of styrofoam and we just put it all together, got an engine out of a car that was already totaled, and we went up and down the Hudson and came back down around Manhattan, and we incorporated a lot of sort of immersive like theater performance stuff and did a show at the end, and it was great. So then a few years later, we got invited to take it to the Venice Biennial, and we went to Slovenia, which after the war has a very, very small part of the coast. And we rode these things. The police weren't really feeling us at that point. From there, I went on to this festival called Robodoc, where I worked with Christian Risto, who, when I first met him on the playa, you know, I'd read and heard about survival research labs, and Flynn was part of it. And I was working on the ranch for like 2 months, and then I finally get to go to Burning Man, and I see this guy is just his boy and the most destructive, ultra-violent sculptor I've ever seen. And he started teaching me robotics. When I first walked up, he was like, can you put together a flamethrower? I was like, no, but I'm really good with Lego. So he gave me the tools. He gave me the tools to start creating that type of thing on my own, started teaching me robotics. From there, I met some of the guys from it wasn't even Robot Heart then. I met a guy named Walt, and I was showing a sculpture in a really uptight gallery, and there's all these people around that were like, what the hell is this? And Walt walked up and was immediately, hey, can I ride your thing? And from there on, there was just a line of people trying to ride the thing. So he was like, hey, we want to make this group where we're going to, you know, try to share love and play music and teach people that it's okay to love each other. And that's kind of what spawned Robot Heart. That's also where I met the other artists that I built this project with, Gong Ki-rin. I met Teddy Lowe on that bus. And he and I decided we were going to try to talk about all of the scrap that was leaving America and going to China and then being brought back, et cetera. So yeah, this took me forever, and I don't really know much what I want to say about it, but come find me later if you want to talk about this one. Then I started getting really into shipping containers. Part of it was working at the shipyard with Jim Mason, and part of it was just knowing that they are one of the highest amount of scrap that we produce as a people. So from there, I built this project, and that's kind of what inspired Rachel and I to start building the activity and take action on all of the schools and the art programs being shut down. And instead of whining about it or complaining, we're like, you know, screw it, we're just gonna build our own school. And right now, as, I got a forward head. Which one you want? All right, I'm just gonna do, yeah, that one usually makes me cry. So fast forward to me getting to Detroit. I only have like 2 seconds left. So I came to Detroit. I've been inspired by Tyree Guyton, who decided he was just going to turn his neighborhood into art. And so we got invited by Juxtapose and a local project called Powerhouse. And they were like, here's 5 houses, you know, turn them into art. As soon as we were done, I was like, what's going to happen? And they said, you know, we're hoping that the crack dealers don't move back in. And I offered to buy the house. So from there, I met Matt, got Rachel to take a picture of me in front of our shipping container, drew this little 3D rendering of this treehouse classroom we're gonna build, and we found funding. We just manifested it. In the same way she doesn't really believe in fate, I don't either, but I just call it manifestation. Like, I hope that you guys can really, no, I'm not even gonna say that. This is the last thing. This is where we're going in Detroit. After the dragon became sort of a symbol of the rebirth, I wanted to create a symbol for Detroit. And my first thought was surviving. So for the next year and a half, we're working on a bunch of cockroach art cars to talk about being survivors.